Well, good evening, everyone. And we'd like to thank you for those here in person and those on our online audience for joining us on this evening. I'm Leofric Thomas. I'm the manager of data and policy at Jacksonville Public Education Fund. And on behalf of our organization, we'd like to welcome you to Advocacy Night, which will be a conversation around Duval County Public Schools legislative platform. So please actively engage in all that is in store for us on this evening, online and here in person. Before we get started, I'd like to bring up our esteemed president, Mrs. Rachel Tutwiler Fortune, to bring greetings and set the tone for the evening. Miss Rachel Tutwiler Fortune.
Thank you, Leofric. And I just want to echo Leofric in expressing our deep gratitude to you all for being here. This is very important that we civically engage and that we make sure that we're informed around critical issues that are facing public education and our public school system. So we appreciate your advocacy, we appreciate your leadership in the community, and your commitment to being a part of the positive change in our public schools. I want to especially thank our panelists this evening, our school board member, Cindy Pearson of District 3. Give it up for Ms. Pearson. As well as Kortney Wesley, our Director of Government Affairs for Duval County Public Schools. I also want to thank Lee Offrick for his great work in partnering with our Duval County Public Schools partners and pulling tonight together. We really appreciate all that he does to help ensure that the community is informed and activated on important issues in public education. I would be remiss if I didn't also acknowledge our funding partners who help make this work possible. In particular, our advocacy efforts this year are being supported by the Community Foundation for Northeast Florida, and we really appreciate the Community Foundation for its steadfast commitment and partnership to ensure quality public education in our community. So with that, I will give it back to Leofric.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And if you want to know more, you can find out more on JPEP's website or also sign up for our newsletter letter to receive timely updates. However, before we proceed, we like to share the story of an inspirational educator and 2025 Teacher of the Year finalist who is making an invaluable impact on the students she works with and beyond. Her work has inspired this event on tonight. So to our in-person and online audience, please meet Miss Aubrey Alberson. The curtain is about to open. Give it a minute. Thank you for your patience. Coming up. Well, now that the tone is set, that leads us into the purpose of this evening's community conversation that is sought to be tremendously informational. Joining us today, we have school board member Cindy Pearson, who with intro music, right? Who represents District 3, and we have Mrs. Kortney Wesley, who is the director of. Are you thinking about that for your garage floor? But we have Mrs. Courtney Wesley, who's the director of government relations for Duval County Schools, and we will have a great conversation about the DCPS legislative platform and 2025 legislative session. So, to our online audience and here, you can utilize your Q&A question cards, and you have the platform at your disposal at the tables. And online, we will have that. You can utilize the chat box for that as well, and we will try to get to each question tonight. If not, we will try to get those answered in another way. But you can also have those answers through our advocacy notebook or our newsletter following this event. So, with that being said, let's get into our discussion for this evening. My first question will be for Mrs. Wesley. As a director of government affairs, let us know how the process behind crafting. What is the process behind crafting a platform for the district? How does it? How long does it take? What channels do you travel to get this information? Just enlighten us on that process.
Sure, that is a great question. And new to this session, we took a different approach where I speak to not only the board members and get their feedback on different things that they'd like to see based off the previous legislative session. I take a conversation with the administrators and cabinet members and see what things that might need a small tweak based on their professional expertise, and the superintendent. Then we build on that and we say, okay, let's look at past sessions and what's been a trend. What did they get a little bit off, and or maybe in practice it's not working as intended. After that, we I compile the information. I usually start right after session, and that is the best time for advocates such as yourself to start having those conversations with your elected officials. So I compile all the information and I present it to the board. Then it's the board's decision from there, or what will make the platform and what won't. They too have their own ideals, and they talk among themselves and kind of come to a safe landing place. And that is now the board's legislative platform. Um, I think everyone is so intentional with presenting something that is doable, achievable, and something, and also put in things that, they want to test the waters maybe and see what happens with it, knowing that they can build on it for later sessions. I also work with other directors of government affairs, such as myself, throughout the state and throughout the nation to see kind of what worked in their area and what didn't work. So hope that answers your
Oh,
question.
that definitely did. So I just want y'all to know that they put me in the middle, so you're gonna get my left and my right side tonight. I hope it looks great. But so my next question is for Board Member Pearson. As Ms. Wesley just said, many of you for many of you who do not know, Board Member Pearson is the legislative liaison for the school board. So what does that process look like for the board members? I know she gave us some insight that you all may discuss among yourselves and kind of see some trends, but just give us some insight on maybe your process and how that's worked for you in the past, on how we come up with, or how board members come up with this solidified platform.
Thank you again. And so I do start making notes as we're going through session. And also when I see the legislation that is passed, and then listen in our workshops as we talk about it in policy meetings, because each time a piece of legislation is passed and becomes law, then we have to incorporate that into board policy. So we have discussions as we are updating our board policy. We also have discussions about what we would like to see happen. And then as I am out in schools and talking with principals and talking with other staff, understanding what this legislation or what these new rules feel like to the people who are actually having to implement it. And so take all of that information and put it into kind of my list of things that I think are doable, and then things that are aspirational. And so you will always see pre-K funding from me, because one day it's going to happen, and we're taking little bites of it at a time and getting a little closer, I hope. So for me, that's the Duval County side. The FSBA side, which is Florida School Board Association, I'm responsible for working with Kortney to submit some items for the FSBA legislative platform as well. And then I, as a committee member, I go to a meeting with other committee members from school boards around the state, and we have quite a session where everything that has been proposed from all 67 counties is put into a list and put into categories, and then we talk it out, and I go and fight for the Duval items. I want as many Duval items as possible to get on the FSB legislative platform. And I will say, in the past, some of our items that have gone on to FSBA platform have actually made it into law. So we do a good job with that here. And then we run the agenda, the legislative agenda. So when we go to Tallahassee, as we're having meetings during off session, or sending emails as I'm out talking with community groups, I am talking about what's on the platform and trying to get others to join us in that advocacy, so that we have a unified Duval voice on issues where we can agree.
And
Go
Leofric, I'd
ahead,
be
yeah,
remiss
jump in.
if I didn't add that your school board is very concerned and active, which is something you don't see with as my short tenure of 2 years that I've been there. But they are actively engaged with our state legislators. Board Member Pearson and all of our board members that I have seen work closely and answer phone calls from their when they sometimes right before they go on the floor to hear about things and answer questions and get answers, as well as myself. But having that type of access is something that is really powerful for Northeast Florida. I don't think people realize how influential Northeast Florida is in this current legislative session.
And that says a lot, because you said you go into the Lions Den with 67 other counties, and we get our priorities put on the docket. That says a lot, because I don't know how I would do fighting with 67 other counties, and you're doing a great job with that. So thank you. So now that we have that great information, we were introduced to Miss Alba earlier, who is a special education teacher and, like I said before, Teacher of the Year finalist this year. But data shows that funding for ESC and ELL programs have not been equitably funded. So direct this to Mrs. Wesley. Share with us the importance of addressing that, and does the district feel this is something that could have some momentum towards change in the legislature?
I can't turn on a microphone. Well, I can't speak to that directly. Her specific situation, what I can say is that I'm seeing trends this session. A lot of bills that are geared towards servicing and increasing the services for students with unique abilities. Just this week, Senator Harrell passed in the Senate, Senate Bill 112, which is students with developmental disabilities. She has a firsthand experience. She has two nephews on the autism spectrum disorder. So this was something very close to her. And so these bills are designed, again, to increase the services for these students with unique abilities. The challenge is always the funding. And here too, with the new legislative priorities and the mandates, we have to fight for the funding. And so we have to do it at the state level. And sometimes it comes in rulemaking. And that's when the legislative session has ended and the actual agencies go and look at what's been passed and say, okay, how can this work? What is the actual, they get into the sausage making, and the rules will be X, Y, and Z. And then they give all of this to the governor, where he sees the budget and gives it a veto, no veto.
Board Member Pearson, I'll allow you if you want to follow up.
Sure. I was going to talk about a few specific bills that I've been following, and then also talk about federal a little bit as well, because when it comes to ESC, federal is very important. So Kortney mentioned 112, 102, Senate Bill 102, Senate Bill 102, exceptional student education. Since our video featured a CSS teacher, which are teachers who work with students on the autism spectrum, this is a workforce credential program for students with autism spectrum disorder. And so that specifically is going to reach that population. Two others that are tangentially related. One is HB 327, which is an interstate compact for school psychologists. That's an area where we have huge needs in our district for school psychologists, but this would recognize licenses among the states who are in the compact, so it would make it easier for the district to hire and onboard qualified school psychologists who are coming from another state. It would recognize their license there. And so that's tangentially related, because when students are evaluated for ESC, a school psychologist is part of that process. And so when we have fewer than we need, it makes it longer, right? It takes longer. And then the last one is Senate Bill 508, and that's called Family Empowerment Scholarship. And I listened to a Senate hearing from Monday on this one, and it requires private schools that are participating in the Family Empowerment Scholarship to provide information to parents in writing related to IEPs, education plan, ELL plan, or 504 plan, and let them know upfront in writing any modifications, accommodations, or therapies that will be honored by that private school. And that a lot of that discussion today was parents do have choice and should make choices, but they need to make the most informed choices that they can. And so this will give parents who are considering a change the opportunity to make the most informed choice that they can. As far as federal goes, a lot of our funding for ESC services comes through IDEA, which is a mandate And so I go once a year to Washington, D.C., and work with other members from FSBA. And we visit our Florida delegation members, and we specifically talk about the need for not to cut IDEA, at the very least to hold it steady, but ideally to increase it. The district in previous years spends more on services than we receive. And so that is an area where we could always use more funding.
Absolutely, and we'll get into another area here. Data and research shows that teacher shortages are occurring rapidly, not just in Duval County, but in school districts across the state and the nation. Of course, there are various factors that contribute to this, one being teacher certification. The DCPS legislative platform titles this as flexible certification requirements for teacher recruitment and retention. So, Mrs. Wesley, tell us about what inspired this item on this year's platform.
Just what you said, with a teacher shortage. We have, we're a military town. We have people coming in with their spouses or significant others and have a certification. And the bill that is being introduced now might help alleviate some of that. Not only our teachers, but with our mental health professionals and counselors. This is one of those bills that I can, gleefully wave in support. And when that happens, we need our other advocates, such as yourselves in the room, to do the same. They love praise, and we need to support them when we can. So really, that was really what was behind the thought. Let's make it easier for people to enter this profession, knowing that we've done all the checks and screenings, knowing that they're qualified, but cut down some of the barriers that would keep them out of the profession of teaching.
And so, with that information, Board Member Pearson, is there anything in legislation that shows we have any momentum towards this?
It is, but it's hard to find because there's several provisions in Senate Bill 166, which is 100 pages long. And I read it this afternoon, all 100 pages of it. So within that, I'll give you a little sampling of what's in, and I'm going to give you line numbers in case you want to look it up. So in line 1593, there's some changes to performance evaluation, proposed changes to performance evaluation for staff. 1643, line 1643, some changes to incentive pay. In 1648, quite a long discussion on changes to CTE teachers and what would enable them to be in the classroom, what we would require of career and technical full-time and part-time teachers. There is a discussion about advanced degrees and pay, premium pay for advanced degrees. There's a proposal in line 1484, instructional multi-year contract. After you have a 5-year extension, you would be eligible for a 10-year extension. So that's in Senate Bill 166. And then 1251, financial incentive or rewards to teachers at eligible schools. Title I funds, up to 5% of Title I funds could be used to incentivize or reward teachers in hard-to-staff schools. So I think those are some good things in 166, but you have to work for it to know that they're there. But that bill is moving through the Senate.
Well, I want to say I appreciate you for giving us the cliff notes on that, because a 100-page bill, a lot of people are not going to go through that. So I appreciate the line numbers. If our audience, I'm sure, appreciates that as well. So we're going to move forward and discuss our teachers and our students, because the American Federation of Teachers define chronic absenteeism as missing at least 10% of days in a school year for any reason. They also cite this as a primary cause of poor academic achievement. The Florida Department of Education reported that 30.9% of students were chronically absent on last year. And in Duval County, 41.9% of students were chronically absent on last year. Has there been any legislation submitted that we see addressing this, or is there anything on any platform wise that we can hope positively influence this legislation?
Well, if we go back to Senate Bill 166, and I'm going to give you line 538, they talk about a different way of, or a different trigger for starting to work with parents on chronic absenteeism. So the way it's currently written is that a certain number of absences at 90 days, and the bill has been amended to allow staff to start working if those absent numbers are achieved before 90 days. And so we can start the process. We wouldn't have to wait until the 90-day period. We could start working before, which is common sense. And I really appreciate that being in the bill. And there's some reporting as well, some language about reporting.
I have House Bill 1367, that is school absences. This prohibits suspensions based on a student's absence status, which, okay, if they're having trouble getting there, let's not further keep them out of school. The DOE, the Department of Education, would establish a statewide attendance policy. Currently, there isn't one, and it's the districts up to their own rulemaking. And then Senate Bill 938, student absences, primarily does the same thing, but what Board Member Pearson was sharing with the specific day windows in time. So like if the teacher has noticed that a student for the first 45 days has 10 or more absences, he or she has to report it to their principal. Again, clarifying what the definition of absenteeism is. I've been reading and actually experiencing on life. We're having a more difficult time getting our students to see the importance of school attendance. And I think since the pandemic, and
You mean to tell me they don't want the banner perfect attendance anymore like we used to get?
I used to relish
I used
my
to love. I still have them. Oh my gosh, they don't want those anymore.
Yeah, and so I see this as a community issue. If I mean, I remember maybe getting out of school a little bit early, but I would be asked, "Why aren't you in school?" We've kind of just made the assumption that it's not my child, not my problem. But the community really needs to engage and maybe find out what are the barriers keeping our children from attending school. And once we have a community approach, maybe we can find some community solutions.
I think it's worth mentioning here too, and thanking the mayor and her participation with Duval County Public Schools on the Show Up to Shine initiative. We had some sessions over the summer where we did workshop and looked at what the barriers were to attendance, what we could do as a community. Out of that came the Show Up to Shine campaign. And that really stemmed from earlier the reading campaign and us sharing with the mayor and her staff that we can't teach kids who aren't there. So before we can really talk about reading meaningfully, or while we're talking about reading, we also need to talk about attendance.
Well, we do know there's a lot of factors that for some communities impact students getting to school, and one of those happens to be transportation. So that's what we'll segue. And data shows that access to consistent transportation is linked to increases in student attendance. Across all schools, on average, 30%, 36% of students in DCPS missed 20 plus days of school in 2023 to 2024. So, Board Member Pearson, I will let you guide this conversation. As in the district, transportation has become a topic as the search for cuts in the DCPS budget continues. So, what can we hope, if anything, comes from the push from FSBA with the support of DCPS, and for other counties across the state? What can we hope for in that push?
So there are a few ways that we're looking at this. One of them is we're asking for an increase in the base student allocation, which is the dollar amount attached to each student before other factors are accounted for. But the transportation budget, there's a formula, and it starts with the base student allocation, and then there's a Florida price index added to it and some other factors. And then there's a separate calculation for our ESE students. And from that, we get a number, which is going to be our transportation number. And that goes into our general fund. So to give you an idea, the budget for Duval County was 24 million for transportation. To date, we've spent 48 million, and the projection for the year is 71. So we're receiving about 33% of what we're spending. Definitely from the board side, we need to look at where we can make cuts. And that's, I think, a reasonable thing to ask. If you're overspending in a category, you want to look for where you can make cuts. And so the board has changed board policy to align with state statute. And we did that last year with, instead of transporting all students who live within a mile or who live outside of 1.5, we made secondary students, middle and high school, outside of 2 miles, and we kept the elementary at 1.5. And so we are coming into line with that. Magnet busing is a courtesy that the district provides, and that will be a conversation. And I know that's going to be a hard conversation in the community, but that will be something else that we talk about, is if we can afford to continue offering that. And then we also are asking for an increase in the base student allocation so that we can come closer to covering our costs.
Yep, she covered it all. I don't want to jump ahead of you, but there are certain bills that could impact negatively what we get for transportation, hazardous walking, HB 85. Do I have that right? Yeah, 85. Ah, look at me. That could impact it. That's basically saying, if your child bikes or walks to school, it's going to lower the threshold to 1 mile from 1.5. So that means we're busing more students. Is our cost, they're definitely going to go up, but is the funding for busing those additional students going to go up? Are we going to need additional buses? Jacksonville is huge. We have rural, urban, beaches, communities. Are these students walking to school on state roads? Very well could be, depending on where they live. So while I get the intention of HB 85, it's moving pretty quickly. It was just heard again today. I think it's got one more committee stop before it goes to the general floor. That's a term. Usually, a bill will be heard at least 2 times. It must be heard, but it could have more stops. So the more stops it has, that means the more legislators will get to hear and learn and ask questions to the bill sponsor. So if the bill sponsor maybe says, I wrote this bill because I wanted to see students arrive safely, and I've done the research, I've done the studies, and we've had incidents in my district, and I think they're happening in your district as well. And you see, the legislator would see that maybe additional funding is needed, and you can ask, well, is there more funds coming with your bill? And they could say there are more funds coming. They could say it's not determined yet. And that's where people like myself say, oh, hey, this is going to increase our spend in certain areas where, the bill sponsor just doesn't have enough information. And so that's what I'm there to do, provide information and advocate on behalf of Duval County Public Schools and the school board.
And go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, and we're not just relying on other people to solve our problems. The board passed a resolution in the fall. I think at that point we were at something like 11 students that had been hit on the way to or from school or school activities. And at that time, I think we had 2 fatalities. We are now up to 20 students who have been hit on the way to or from school or school activities, and 3 fatalities, which is unusual. And so the board passed a resolution calling on the superintendent to do 3 things. One was a pedestrian and bicyclist safety week for students, which the district came up with, Be Safe, Be Seen. And that has run through all of our schools. And I'm working with community partners and other board members to extend the life of that campaign throughout the community. The second thing we asked for was a community conversation on what we can do to collectively. It is a parent, it is a student issue, it is a parent education issue, and it is also a driver issue. And so we all have a part in this. And then the third thing was to work collaboratively with other electeds or government folks to look at appropriations, looking at the lack of sidewalks in some areas or the hazardous conditions. But we need to be able to attach funding to it. And that is where the problem comes in. We all agree that we want our students to have safe routes to school, but sometimes providing that safe route comes with a cost, and we are not sure where that money is going to come from to provide that safe route. And so that's something we're working on.
So it's pretty, easy to say this kind of early in this process to kind of get a judgment on that. But we need to make sure it makes as many stops as possible on the hill so it's heard. Right.
Well, that is up to the chair
Uh,
of the committee. And again, we've got in the House, Jessica Baker is on education. Vice Chair Dean Black is on an education uh, uh, and Daniels and Michaels are on education committees. And in the Senate, we both of our senators on education committees. So, again, the influence in Northeast Florida is felt and heard. We need you to also advocate on behalf of our district and our young people and have that investment be made.
awesome, awesome. Well, moving on to a more I guess you can say this issue activated our community across the state very quickly, especially when a certain survey went out. However, high school students are about, data shows that high school students are about 34% of the student population, and middle school students are about 20% of the student population. So that's about 54% between the two. And the legislature back in 2023 through HB 733 was submitted and stated that district school boards were required to adopt start times for middle and high schools, where middle schools would not begin before 8 a.m. and high schools would not begin prior to 8:30 a.m., beginning with the 2026-2027 school year. This piece of legislation went on to pass at the time. So we know shifting start times impacts a variety of things for families across our community. Is there legislation moving to address this item, and is there positive momentum in favor of these various communities?
Yes, when you say the hot button, this has been the hot button issue. While we all understand the need for our young people to get more sleep, um, having does it need to be taken out of the control of the parents? This does work in some communities where maybe they'll put the athletic programs at the beginning of the day, or maybe they will shift some other things around. But for us, a district, again, we're the sixth largest school district in the state, 20th in the nation. Uh, you know, who do we put on the street at earliest? Because we have a three-tier system. We only have so many bus drivers. And so they need the buses to pick up the elementary school. That same bus driver does another loop, picks up the high schoolers, does another loop, and picks up the middle schoolers. So who is at the bus stop first? We also need the older students to maybe receive their younger siblings when school is over. And what about work? What about athletics? There is legislation being carried by Representative Bradley and Senator Bradley and a new Representative Gerwick to repeal that and return it to local control is the stance that the board took. It is on our platform that we retain local control and let the school board decide when the school day would start. But all of those issues, and I'm sure you want to jump into, but I've sat across from senators who've said, Well, but studies show and I get it, but that should be a parental control issue, and we can't control bedtime.
I want to take my time to say thank you. I know that there are a lot of people locally who have sent emails to the members of the Duval delegation, to the members of the House and Senate committees that will be hearing these bills. And when I was in Tallahassee last week, we heard from them that they had heard from you. And so I do appreciate when we put out a call and ask for you to write in, for you to contact, that you do that because it makes a difference. It really does. And so we'll continue to have conversations about SB 296 and HB, I think it's 261, 3, 261, 260 something. And we'll continue to have those conversations, but this is a priority for this session.
It really is. I can't stress that enough. This is moving. So if you want your voice heard on this issue, get up to Tallahassee within the next 2 weeks if you can. There is tracking available on websites. The Florida Channel is a great resource, and it will tell you what's being heard and what's going to be heard. And that way you can track the bill, or you can shoot me an email. I'll give out my email address after this, and I'll tell you if it's a good time to go to or not about your issue.
All right. Well, that's good. That's hot on the press and moving. So we're happy to hear about that. So we'll jump forward and we'll talk about school safety and funding for new mandates. And this on the platform shows to advocate for adequate funding to implement new state mandated school safety initiatives, proposing a statewide fund for school districts to meet these requirements. So I'm going to pass it on to you two to kind of discuss that.
Okay, I'll start with the good news, which is SB 1470. I listened to that today on the Florida channel. It was from the Senate hearing ed committee on Monday. And this bill is addressing some of the practical difficulties from the safety bill that was passed last year. And two of the items that were brought up in the committee were the new requirement that all doors and gates be locked or staffed whenever students are on campus. And there were a lot of questions. Does that mean after school? Does it mean a Friday night football game? Does it mean if you let Boy Scouts meet at your school, but they're students? Is that what it means? If a church rents out your school and there are children, does it apply then? Or if it applies, do we have to have staff there to make sure that the renter is following the law, or will the school be penalized through that? So those were a lot of practical questions that came up, and so they're talking about going back to the bell to bell, which is what it used to be before this bill. So there's still discussion on that. I don't think they've landed, but that was part of the discussion. The other part has to do with the locked doors, and every door on campus needs to be locked. Every gate needs to be locked or staffed. And then there are some exceptions that schools can apply for. And it's been a learning process to figure out what does and doesn't qualify for an exception. And a couple of the examples that were given in the Senate hearing had to do with like an automotive career and technical program where they're working on engines and there's a garage door, but that garage door is within the perimeter of a fence, of the fenced school. So could they allow for the garage door to be open, because actually the fumes inside the classroom, which is a garage, are actually dangerous. And the same thing, they gave the example for welding as well, where you have a welding program and there is a large door, but the classroom is inside the fenced perimeter. So can we allow for the ventilation, because that's actually safe for students as well. So those were some of the conversations. I'm glad that that the bill sponsor heard from school-based staff and districts about the difficulties and the confusion, and then took the initiative to write a bill to address them. I'm really encouraged by that. And that's something that as we go through our process, we make notes on, and I'm just very encouraged for that conversation this year.
We're always going to see bills that impact school safety. So just always put that on your, if there's something that your organization wants to have, build their own platform, make sure you put school safety on there because it's going to get funded in some shape or form if it is agreed upon. But I'd also add to those bills that you mentioned, just requirements for teachers training for mass casualty events. And the other stuff really doesn't apply to Duval because we have our own police department, but it requires the sheriff to come up with a safety plan and report that to Office of Safe Schools. But again, here in Jacksonville, we are really fortunate to have such good men and women in our DCPS police operation.
That sounds good. Anybody want to add anything else? All right. So I'm going to move forward. The word efficiency, we've heard a lot the last few months. And now we're hearing it as administrative efficiency. And we're seeing that as the support using additional concordant scores or portfolios to demonstrate proficiency in required state standards to permit students to continue progression to earn a standard high school diploma, eliminate teacher certifications being tied to a school district, which we talked about earlier, to allow for greater opportunities, and reduce unnecessary reporting in consolidated funding categories. So do we have any more information outside of what we kind of touched on earlier regarding this?
I'll start because I think you have a lot more of the insider process.
I have the history of where the term came from.
Oh, wait a minute. I don't. Okay.
Okay. So if you look on the FSBA platform, which was put together early in the fall, late summer, number 2 is administrative efficiency. We knew that there would be deregulation bills, but there was the term deregulation had become stale. And so as we were trying to figure out how to rename it as a group, we came up with administrative efficiency. And as the FSBA lobbyist shopped it, one of the senators said, "Oh, I like that. I might use it." And she said, "Go right ahead." So another thing that FSBA is impacting.
You were right. And I knew that story too. I forgot. And I was like, wait, what does she have? I will say Senator Simon has been tasked with carrying some very weighty bills. I guess they thought of his time with the NFL, he can carry this weight on. Like Board Member Pearson shared, that this is, again, following the model of deregulation. And that's really looking at the policies that are in place, seeing where we can drop some regulations that are already there. This bill has a lot of good in it, and we are in support. I will say a lot of good. So we want to keep the momentum of deregulation going, even if the House is not so entertained by deregulation. I think they understand that this needs to happen. As we put on new policies, we need to go back and look at the old ones that are there and make sure that they still are aligned, or maybe it's time for them to roll off. So that's all I was going to add to that.
All right, we're good. So as we roll our way on to Q&A, going to get to that slide in a minute. We during our conversations leading up to this event, we discussed some things that maybe we kind of took us by surprise. We weren't really aware of some bills, some legislation, some talks. So what are some of those things that we should probably now look at that we didn't think we were looking at before?
I still think it's too early to see what the surprises are. I'm tracking over 100 something bills. We're leading into week 3 of the legislative session. So the trends that I mentioned of maybe students with disabilities, safety are there, but rumor has it that on the House is going to be a little bit more intentional this year, and not so many bills will get through. So while you might see a list of all the bills that are floating out there, still too early to say this is, there's always bargaining going on behind the scenes. Maybe we don't hear these bills, but by a certain point in the process, a bill has to have at least one committee stop. And so with us going into week 3 and so many haven't been heard, either they're going to do marathon sessions, which doesn't happen that often. They could, or a lot of these bills just will be TP'd until the next legislative session. And so that means for right now, I say it's too early to say what's caught me by surprise, but there's always those train bills that come along, and there's always the opportunity for amendments for a bill that somebody's wanted to catch it. So I guess House Bill 123 would be my surprise of right now. It did find its way onto the legislature before last year. We will continue to monitor it. That's what I can say from my Switzerland stance. But the bill speaks to if you have had declining enrollment over the past 5 years, or if you're not an A-rated school district, you cannot buy or acquire property. Well, for Duval, that presents a challenge. As you know, the administrative building, some perceive is in the way of progress. So we're looking to sell the building. So with that, if we cannot, because we've had the declining enrollment, everyone has, we cannot buy or acquire property. Where are we going to go if we sell it? It takes away the control of the elected official, and I'll let Board Member Pearson speak a little bit more to that. It also, the school and the school properties are public assets. And so what happens with those public assets is up to the elected official to control. This bill would give that control to the Florida Department of Education. I encourage you to look at House Bill 123 and Senate Bill 140 to really see what's in that bill and have a conversation with your legislator.
Another part of well, there were two things about that surprised me, but one was it prohibits districts from purchasing or acquiring. So even if someone, the way I'm interpreting it, even if someone wanted to swap land with us or give us land to build a new school or to build on, we couldn't receive it, which that's shocking to me that would be in there. But the other part of that is we know that Jacksonville is large. We know that Jacksonville is growing to the edges. And so although we've had declining enrollment, there are certain parts of town that are booming. If you look at the E-Town and down towards Nocatee or up towards Densmore, up in that area, they're booming. And so we need to be able to respond to growth. We need to be able to sell buildings that we're closing for consolidations and reinvest the proceeds into land and buildings to address growth in other areas. And I think that's a reasonable request. And I'm hearing that from a lot of districts. That's the perspective of a lot of districts. And I do think that message is getting through. But to answer your question, what's surprising me is that there are some bills that are moving very quickly in one chamber and not at all in another. And they have, you need both in order to make it to the end. And so I've been kind of surprised by how quickly something's moving in the House and not moving at all in the Senate, or vice versa. And so I'm going to be watching that. If you are not tracking bills or don't know this, I'll just throw it in on floridasenate.gov. You can go and put in the bill number And then you can sign up to track a bill and you'll get email alerts whenever something happens with that bill. So I did that one day. I just sat down and tracked a bunch of bills. And when you go to, say, the Senate, if you know the Senate bill, you can go down to the bottom and there's a grid. And one of the items on the grid is related bills. And you can click on that and that will give you the House bill. And then you can click onto the House bill and you can track the House bill as well. And so I have found that to be pretty handy. And then also the Florida channel, looking for those. And if you look at the Ed committees, House or Senate, you can go in and look at the agendas for those and the packets for those. And so I found those to be helpful as well, helpful resources as I'm trying to understand more. Advocacy really starts with research. And so trying to understand what the bill is about, follow the conversation, follow the concerns, figure out what your concerns are, and then represent those in a way that hopefully is constructive and makes a difference.
Right. Thank you for that. So, before we move into Q&A, if you have any questions written down, we could submit, or you can give it to either one of our staffers that's walking around. It's one or two, Amy, or you have Miss we have Yuko. I can't see her, so she's probably walking around. But anywho, and I'm not sure if we have any online, but I know they'll be submitted if there are. We do want to give you a call to action before we get into Q&A, which is to, as Board Member Pearson and Ms. Wesley said, track legislation on your different platforms. You have your Senate website, and we are offering that on JPEF's website as well. So just like Board Member Pearson, I'm getting those same emails tracking that same legislation, and we're going to update that on our website as well. And also, as Ms. Wesley continues to say, contact your state representative or your local representative by phone, email, letters. If you want to travel to Tallahassee one day, go ahead and travel down I-10 and make the visit to your state legislators, and also inform others of the information you've received and continue to receive. As we said, it's still very early, and by the time we get to May 2nd, a lot of these things can look completely different. So you want to make sure you continue to stay informed and be engaged. So to our first question, we will use this one. What is an example of a bill that you have on an agenda of, I'm sorry, I think I'm reading this wrong. What is an example of a bill that you got on the agenda of the legislature last year and did it pass? I think I'm reading that right. And it said, did it pass with a question mark?
2 years ago, there was a extending the temporary certificate for teachers. That came from our HR director, Vicki Schultz. And that was one of her items that she wanted to see happen. I was able to argue it onto the FSBA or the FSBA platform. And I think Senator Simon picked it up and included it in something that he was doing. So extending it from 3 to 5 years, that came from Duval. And it's helpful. It's been helpful.
All right. Okay, so we have a question here is, how does FSBA's platform differ from the legislative platform of the Florida I can't. I'm gonna come back to that. Somebody's gonna decide. I think so. Are there conflicts of interest? You said it.
Yes, I actually have not seen the platform for the other organization. I have a copy of the FSBA platform with me tonight, and there is overlap between Duval County's platform and FSBA. It's not an exact match, but I have not looked at the other organization's platform, so I can't speak to it.
Same. I haven't looked at that platform. Is there something that maybe the person who asked the question wanted to know about that we've maybe seen so far online? Okay, maybe they'll have time to just type that in there real quick.
Okay, perfect. All right. Would it be possible for FSBA to get behind, and of course, probably can't answer that one, but would it possibly be possible for FSBA to get behind the reopening of PICO funding to district-run schools for fortifying schools for emergency designation?
So interestingly enough, if you look at SB 166, there's something in there. It's a strike through. The language says that districts cannot use PICO. And so, like I said, I read all 100 pages this afternoon. That's an item that I've flagged to go back and look at and ask some folks what that's really saying. So it's in 166. I don't know if I have the line number for it, so you might have to read all 100 pages to find it. However, it's in there. It's in there, and that's something that I'm going to research further.
And by strike through, that means it was in there somewhere along the way, either the committee staff or the committee or maybe the bill sponsor chose to remove it. We don't have the reasoning why it was removed, but maybe there's room to get it back in there, and maybe they know something's going to happen with the funding to adjust it. It will solve itself.
Okay. And I'm going to actually email Boardman Pearson after this to try to get the cliff notes on that, so we don't have to read 100 pages on that line if she goes back. But I'll be reading that bill as well, just to look at that item. So next question is regarding HB 123. Does the prohibition of acquiring property apply to charter schools operating in the county since they receive public funds? As best as you can tell, why is it being proposed? A and B.
So again, I'm Switzerland. The bill, apparently there are some districts somewhere in Florida who aren't being as forthright with the resources that they've acquired. Could be a situation of where several groups, the public school, some charter school, maybe a private school, has their eye on some property that they all see as valuable to increase their their schools offerings, and maybe one party owns it, say the public school, the district owns the property, and the others want them to sell it. Again, currently, it is up to the school board and with the recommendation of a superintendent, what they sell and don't sell. So that control would be removed from that elected body. Also, the first part of the question was, does that apply to charter? It's really focused, the bill is focused towards the school district, as we have most of the land currently, if that makes sense. I hope that was clear.
There are other parts to 123. One speaks to conversion, charter conversion. One speaks to a district-run charter, and it's a job engine charter, which is not defined in the bill, which I find hard, but it's not defined in the bill, so we really don't know what that is. And then there is the part that I mentioned about acquiring, and there's a fourth part. And there's a fourth part. That's right. If the district were to ask the DOE to declare something surplus so that we could sell it, before we could sell it, we would have to offer it to a charter school, the city,
Or workforce.
or workforce housing.
Cecily.
And so that really does take that financial stewardship piece away from the school board to be able to say, we're going to make the hard decision to close a school and consolidate. We're going to sell the land that we're not using, and we are going to reinvest into our current schools, or we're going to reinvest for growth. And so that's a great question. I'll research and ask. We can ask specifically, but my sense is that it would not apply to charter schools, since the bill is very pro-charter focused.
Correct. And what people don't realize, and what I am learning, is all the decisions that go into where we put a school. We project, city manager will tell you, they project for growth 10 years, 20 years out. This bill is asking you to look at growth based on a very abbreviated window. Imagine had this bill come to us maybe 10 years ago, would we have said there was going to be growth in E-Town? There's no telling, and that opportunity could have been missed for the district. We could have situations where there's not enough. We might own the property. There's just not enough land to build a school there. Um, but all those things kind of go into a decision of where you place a school and where you don't place a school. And projecting for growth is one of the things that a school board must, one of the hard decisions you have to make. And you all have done a good job, but now it's time to, what you're working on now with selling of the properties that the district currently owns.
Another part of the conversation we just heard in workshop on Tuesday is that the provision of declining enrollment for 5 years. We have had declining enrollment, but this year we flattened. So hooray for all of us who have worked hard to recruit our neighbors to our public schools. But we flattened, and I'm excited about that. And so my goal is to start trending upward again, right? And it should be no secret that I want to compete for students. And so we're going to do that. And so to put that on us, I think we're going to need to grow, right? And so that's been hard also, because we have plans.
Next question is, if someone has a proposal that will positively impact school safety and the personal development of the students, how does someone present this proposal to legislators or even to the district? What steps can they take to get this proposal heard?
Well, they are your elected official. Schedule an appointment. If you can't get an appointment with the member themselves, you get an appointment with staff. Staffers are the lifeblood of any elected official's office. I used to be a staffer for a congressional office. It's we do a lot of the work and a lot of the research. You present your thought, having done your research about what's currently uh, doable based on the law. You show them data of why your bill, your proposal can work, and they're always going to want to know, how much is this going to cost? If you can get those numbers, you get those numbers. Those resources are available to you through state legislative staffers. So you have the staffer who works in Representative Thomas's office. Then you have the staffer who works for the committee. So they too can help you craft legislation around your idea. The bigger the body is asking for something, the more movement you typically see. This is from my staffer hat, former staffer hat, that you see, you get the attention of the member. So if it's you, that's great. You're a lone wolf. That means you're going to have to press a little harder, find other like-minded people. But if it's a group, say it's the PTA, say it's an organization, a church, NAACP, that's when you're speaking with one voice, and you tend to get a little bit more attention. And if it's a group that has joined forces with another group, oh boy. So that's your research is step one. You're scheduling that meeting with the elected official or their representative is step two. And then you keep chopping away at it. You're not going to knock it out of the park on the first try. Like, that's really those rare bills that are seen all the way through the process. It could be a 10-year process. It could be a 3-year process. But as long as you've committed to working the process, watching the bill grow, getting like-minded individuals to help champion, advocate for you, the more chances of success you'll have.
And I've learned too that that those are great. I've learned too that there's a rhythm to the state legislature. And so there's a cutoff for when bills can be filed. We're past that now. So it's too late if you have a great idea for this year. Start working on your great idea for next year. And there, every other year is the session is either early or late. And so we're in the late session, started in March, going through May. Next year will be the early session. So we will start working on our legislative agenda over the summer with the goal of having it finished by August, probably about the time school starts. And then start working, they'll have committee weeks before the session, before the hanky drops, and they actually start. And so going over meeting, if you're going to pitch this to your member of the House or your senator, try to do that over the summer. Recognize most of them have jobs in addition to being an elected official. So leave yourself plenty of time to try to work through scheduling conflicts. But then also go during committee weeks and try to listen to the priorities of what they're having presentations on, and then talk with key people during committee weeks so that when it's time to start filing bills, everything's ready. If you wait until they're starting to file bills, I think you're probably too late. Maybe you could get an amendment, but you're probably too late. So understanding the rhythm of the body that you're trying to interact with is also important.
Awesome. All right. Well, as we wrap up Q&A, I believe. Oh, you got one? All right, go ahead. We'll ask it. No, I'm gonna say we'll bring it to you in a minute. I'm just move to this next thing, give you a minute. All right. So if you have time before we get to his question, we want you to fill out our survey from this evening. So to our online audience or to our in-person audience, we actually have paper copies of our survey. I believe Yuka can bring them in if she has opportunity. But if not, if you want to go ahead and fill it out, you can scan this QR code and you can fill out our survey from this evening. It's going to really help us and give us feedback as we continue to track legislation and get your feedback on what you are looking for, what some things that you want to know more. And that also gives us an opportunity to engage in more conversations with Mrs. Wesley and board member Persons and the board member Pearson and the like to get the information that you would need moving forward. So as we wait on that question, we're going to allow you all, and our persons online, you can click that link in the chat or scan this QR code for our surveys, but we really would like you to fill out that survey and so we can get your feedback and we can, we got two more questions right there. And we can have that. Yeah, you weren't the only one. You weren't the only one. All right. All right. Question one is, what is the outlook for, you got to help me with this one, in increasing teacher pay? This would go a long way in attracting and retaining great teachers. All right. What is the outlook for increasing teacher pay? As this would go a long way in attracting and retaining great teachers.
I will tell you that the legislative body is always thinking about what bills they passed specifically for teacher pay. And they get frustrated when it's kind of, they intended the funding to go straight to teachers, and maybe it's now having to hit 2 or 3 more areas where they didn't intend it to go. That is a focus. There isn't anything specifically yet speaking directly to teacher pay, but it's top of mind, and advocates such as yourself can really go a long way to help getting that all consistently moved and not just big jumps. If we have consistent increases, we can avoid the big leaps and leaving certain groups out in that.
Yeah, I haven't seen the budget specifically to see what's in it, but I would say yes. I hope that there is a respectful increase to teachers, but also to speech language pathologists, to psychologists, to occupational therapists, to our paraprofessionals, to our mechanics, to our all of our groups. because we hear from them at our meetings that they also have been left behind, and we are not competitive, especially with the speech language pathologists, the psychologists, and the occupation, some of those groups. And as a district, we end up spending more because we contract out for those positions, and I think they get left out of the conversation as well. So I hope there is a respectful increase that we can pass on to all of our employee groups. But I will go back to in SB 166, the idea that we could use Title I funds up to 5% to set aside a financial incentive or reward for teachers who are in the difficult teaching positions. I was really encouraged that that was in there, because that's something that we just talked about Tuesday in our workshop. It's something that Duval needs to do that other counties are doing, but we didn't know how we were going to pay for it. So this would give us a way to pay for that.
And next question is, that was both great responses on that. Given that some charter schools enroll students, collect FTE funding, and then remove students who require additional services, ultimately shifting the burden back to public schools, what measures is the state considering to ensure possible accountability to prevent this practice, if there is any consideration to this?
So I mentioned the bill that relates to the Family Empowerment Scholarship, that there needs to be a written list of how the school can respond to the accommodations. I have not seen that for charters. What I can say is what we can control, what I can control as a Duval County School Board member, is us telling our story in a better way and talking about all the services that we provide. And I don't know if you've seen the newest commercial, but it's for deaf and hard of hearing students. And so we need to do a better, I think our most direct way to attack that issue is to do a better job letting parents know that more than likely the best service and education their students are going to get is in a Duval County public school. And so while they have a choice and while they can look anywhere, we're their best option for many, many, many students. And I know that not for all, but for many, many, many students. So having them start the school year with us or not leave us is really the best way to address that issue.
All right, and we're going to round out this with no more questions, right? All right. We have all the questions. So, is there any difference in oversight by FLDOE of large districts versus small districts, or is it one size fits all? Is it something we could advocate for to give larger districts more flexibility across various domains?
No, there's not a one size fits all for everything, things like instruction and counseling and those types of things, transportation. Yes. We are in the middle of what was deemed as a rural renaissance in the State House. So a lot of the bills are going to be so focused on making sure there's parity in the rural communities. So it's we're in a time where that is the focus for the State House. And I have seen increased infrastructure for rural communities, funding for education, just for the again, to bring up the parity to larger districts such as, so the sentiment really is the rural communities have been left behind.
Good. That was good.
I think that's good.
That's good. All right. I think it's the last question. I keep saying it's the last. Is there an annual teacher survey given to teachers to understand what their needs are?
So we do the 5 basics, the 5 essentials. And then there is another survey, I believe, that thank you. And then as a parent, I know I get a yearly, well, that's probably the 5 essentials that I get as a parent. And then we have worked with HR. This is a little different than that answer, but we have worked with HR when teachers leave DCPS to try to do exit interviews and get information as to why someone is leaving and if there's anything we can do to keep them so that they don't leave, but then also collect the information on why teachers are leaving the teaching profession, why they're leaving Duval County Public Schools, and then to look at that information and look at where we need to make changes based on that information.
Give way to you, caught my eye.
The exit interview?
All right. So now that we've wrapped up our Q&A session, once again, thank you for filling out our survey. And we want to thank you for attending on tonight. Once again, legislative session began on March 4th and it ends on May 2nd. And I believe
That's where it's scheduled for.
All right.
Could go long.
could go long.
We've
You're
had
right.
3 special sessions.
You're right.
So far.
So maybe we can join here again after that and discuss this. Can I put let's try to do that. All right, and try to do that for a special advocacy night in lieu of that. But thank you all for joining us on tonight. And remember our call of action steps. Contact your legislators, follow this legislation, and inform all the people you know of some of the information you heard today and some of the information you'll hear in the future. Thank you all once again and have an amazing night.